All right, we got breaking news. I want to get straight to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. She just finished an exclusive interview with the outgoing Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel. Barbara, he was very candid with you about your reporting on the swap of those prisoners, those 5 Taliban prisoners for Bo Bergdahl, the U.S. Army sergeant, the pressure he's been under. Tell us what he told you.
Wolf, the secretary's just a few days away from leaving office tonight. He gave us this interview and surprised us with his candor. We started by talking about that swap, 5 for 1 for Bo Bergdahl, and the overall program that he is in charge of to release prisoners, detainees from Guantanamo Bay. He had an awful lot to say. The 5 for 1, still the right decision in your mind?
Absolutely, it was the right decision. It was the right decision, Barbara, because we don't leave our troops behind. That has been the culture of the American military since George Washington, and we don't do that. In this case, it was clear that Bergdahl was a prisoner of war. The circumstances surrounding that, we have investigated. That investigation is over, and I'm absolutely as committed to that decision today as when the decision was made. It was the right decision. You concern when you release any detainee from Guantanamo? Of course, because there is no 100% guarantee of anything. And I think I've got a pretty clear record on this. In fact, not everyone at the White House has agreed with how I've handled some of this. I have made it very clear that I will not sign anything to release a detainee as long as I'm Secretary of Defense unless I am convinced that it is in the best interest of this country and the substantial mitigation of risk can be verified as closely as we can verify.
You just brought up, you said it, not everyone at the White House agrees with you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what you mean.
Well, I think the press has been pretty clear on that, and I think...
Let's hear it in your own words. Let's have you.
Well, what I've said is what I've just said. Not everyone at the White House has agreed with me.
On what part of this?
Probably on the pace of releases.
Because you've been cautious?
Because I have the responsibility, and I play my own game here, and that is because by law I am the one official in government charged with certification of release of detainees. I take that responsibility very seriously.
Have you had pressure?
We've had a lot of conversations.
With the White House?
Yes. And Congress. And the press.
You don't seem too fussed by the notion that maybe there's been a little pressure from the White House. You're not fussed by that.
Barbara, I've been in this town a long time. And there's pressure all the time in every job that comes from a lot of different directions. And if you're not prepared to deal with pressure every day in the job you're in, coming from a lot of different directions, then you shouldn't be in the job.
Look, Wolf, I have to tell you, we've heard Secretary Hagel since the day he took office. He has never publicly been this candid about that pressure from the White House. What is the pressure? We know that, and he's now confirming it, that the White House wanted him to move faster on approving the release of detainees from Guantanamo Bay, and the White House wanted him to approve more of them. And Chuck Hagel says, look, I'm responsible for national security on this. I'm not going to sign any of these transfers unless I'm convinced it's the right thing to do. On the Bergdahl one, he is convinced. He says he still thinks the problem with that one detainee can be handled. But truly, Wolf, an extraordinary admission from the Secretary in his last few days in office that, yes, he was pressured by the White House.
Yeah, he's certainly very, very blunt by the outgoing Defense Secretary, Barbara, and it will certainly revise all of those suggestions at the time of his announcement of his resignation that he wasn't very happy with what was going on, the pressure he was getting from the White House, right?
I think that this now is a big hint, perhaps even just straight up, an acknowledgement by Chuck Hagel in his final days that he's going to say what he thinks. You know, he's been under huge pressure since all of the kerfuffle. Was he fired? Was he pushed out? Did he resign? Look, it's very clear now that there were differences with the White House. He was a real gentleman about it, trying not to say too much, but we know in these last few days in office, we now know that his view is he can be more candid, he can say what he thinks, he can offer his views, his opinions, and really, nobody can do anything to him now. He's leaving.
He certainly is. I want you to stand by, Barbara, because we want to run more of this exclusive interview you had. He's very blunt, the outgoing defense secretary, but let's bring in the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, Republican Congressman Ed Royce. Are you surprised by his candor, Chuck Hagel?
Well, I think he was very straightforward about the pressure. Considering the pressure that he's under, if we look at some of the individuals released, Fazal, Nouri, these were individuals who participated in what was called the worst atrocities that occurred.
These are among the 5 that were freed in exchange for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl.
That is correct, and 2 of them were involved in atrocities in which 5,000 minorities were slaughtered and in which women were abducted and raped. And so the question now that the story has surfaced, that one of them is already in contact again, trying to rejoin the fight, brings up the whole question of the history of those who've been released from Guantanamo. 30% of them have been involved in some way in getting back into action. And, of course, Americans are targeted. British have been targeted by these former Taliban leaders, and this is on the conscience and it was on the shoulders of our Secretary of Defense.
I want you to stand by, Mr. Chairman. We have more to discuss, more of this exclusive interview coming up. We'll take a quick break. Much more of the breaking news right after this. We're back with the House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce. Congressman, we're getting more of Barbara Starr's exclusive interview with the outgoing Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel. In fact, I want to go back to Barbara at the Pentagon right now. Barbara, you had a chance to sit down exclusively with the Defense Secretary. What else did he tell you?
Well, Wolf, a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about his candor as he is now in his last few days in office. And also, that candor extended to the current coalition campaign to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. One of the big issues on the table is, would there be a recommendation to President Obama that a small number of U.S. ground forces might have to go into Iraq, not the advisors and trainers that we have now, but actual ground forces to go help the Iraqi forces as they make their advances. These people would help collect intelligence, point out targets, go right to the front lines. The Secretary was unusually candid, let me say. He had a few caveats, but he also had a bottom line.
He said to his combatant commanders, specifically General Dempsey and General Austin, if you believe and you want to recommend, you think you need to recommend to me, to the President, that we should look at other options, then I want you to bring those recommendations to me. That so far has not happened. Whether that would happen in the future, again, the President has said to his commanders, if you think this is what's going to be required, I need to know it. You need to make the recommendation, and I'll listen.
What do you think?
Well, I think, just as the President has said, and this is the advice I've given the President, it's what General Dempsey has, is that we have to look at all the options. And I think it may require a forward deployment of some of our troops, not doing the fighting, not doing the combat work that we did at one time for 6 years in Iraq and we did for many, many years in Afghanistan, but to help airstrike, precision,
locate targets,
locate
intelligence.
Those are things where we could continue to support. I would say that we're not there yet. Whether we get there or not, I don't know. Whether that's something that our military commanders would recommend into the future, I don't know. But I think, just as the President has made clear, I need to know your honest opinion, and he's been very forthright about that. What you think, if that's something that you think is required.
You're saying you think it could be necessary.
It could be, but I'm not willing to say that it will be necessary. I say it could be necessary.
He is saying, I think it may require forward deployed U.S. troops. He is caveating that. But what we are seeing for the first time is an insight into his direct advice to President Obama. And let's keep in mind where we are on this. Now we know Defense Secretary Hagel, outgoing, but still, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, the head of the U.S. Central Command, General Lloyd Austin, all have now talked about this, that this could be on the table for President Obama to decide. Wolf? Excellent work,
Barbara. I'm so glad you followed up and you pressed him for answers. That's what you're supposed to do, and you did it. You did it well. Thanks very much. Let's get back to the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce. So forward troops. That sounds like it could be combat troops, even though they might be advisors. If the Iraqi military and the Kurds, the Peshmerga, they're going to go into Mosul, let's say, to try to retake that huge city of nearly 2 million people, and U.S. troops will be forward troops. That's a pretty dangerous operation, whether you call them ground troops or combat troops, whatever you want to call them, that they potentially are in harm's way.
On our committee, we're going to hear from John Allen next week, Wolf, and he was the general, he's retired now, in charge of the Anwar awakening, of working with those Sunni tribes at that time. His current job is working with the State Department, in the State Department, on that same project. So he will lay out to us the way in which some of our special ops and military officers were able to work with the tribes in order at the time to get them to push back on al-Qaeda, and some of the concepts from his perspective about what could be done to take down ISIS.
Well, what's your reaction to what we just heard from Chuck Hagel?
I think that's the dialogue, and that's what we're going to hear from John Allen. How can some of our special ops work with these Sunni, tribal leaders who are expected now to push or play a big role in pushing ISIS out of their territory in Syria, in Iraq?
Do you have any confidence in the Iraqi army?
Well, we don't have a lot of confidence in the Iraqi leadership, and one of the reasons is because they continue to allow Shia militia, in which Iran plays a big hand, to come in here and be engaged in all of this. And every time it happens, of course, it is more disrupting. We've watched the Quds forces and the
Iranian forces.
Yeah, the Iranian special forces. We've watched them now from Lebanon into Syria, into Yemen, into Iraq, all through the region. And this is very, very concerning, because wherever they go, you can notice how they destabilize the local situation. They just did it in Yemen.
You've heard of these reports of a massacre this week, that an Iraqi Shiite militia went into a Sunni area. Survivors say, this is the report that we got, Iraqi military forces watched as Shiite militias executed 72 Sunnis, including young little boys, and the Iraqi military just stood by and let this happen.
The reports, to read them, and of course they're reports at this point, we've got to follow up, but to read that Iraqi soldiers stood there crying, but not stepping in to stop these Shia militia, show the arm that the Iranians have into the country, and the fact that the leadership in Baghdad won't stand up and stand down the Shia militia that are influenced by Iran, and the fact that Iran continues to push these types of tactics is very, very concerning.
So you blame Iran if this massacre is in fact confirmed? You directly blame Iran for that?
We worked we worked to push Maliki to stop the use
former Prime Minister,
the former Prime Minister. We're working to push the current Prime Minister, explaining to him, if you're going to be able to bring order here, you have got to get the Iranians out. You've got to get these Shia militia to stand down, let the military do its job, but to allow these sectarian militias, which are often led by Iranian forces, come in and do the types of butchering they've done. This has been a disaster all through the region.
And it will, if these reports of this massacre are confirmed, it will so poison this relationship, which is already horrible, between Iraqi Sunnis and Iraqi Shia. Who knows what's going to happen down the road?
It is tragic.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Ed Royce is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. More